Well, good morning. This is a big crowd of people. I was coming to give a talk to a small group that might be interested in hearing more about things today. But we're here because, or you're here to hear about AI. And I think, what I want to do is just to give a little context for that discussion. Since AI is for people, I want to talk about what we want as people from this technology and how that's going to work. But let's just first note that the reason we're here is because vehicles have gotten much smarter than they used to be. They increasingly know where they are, what they're doing, and what surrounds them. They have the capability to control steering, engine power, and individual wheel speed. This is enabling some really great technology: automatic emergency braking, lane change assist, lane departure warning prevention systems. These things are already preventing crashes. But it's also enabling autonomous operation of vehicles, and that's what a lot of the talk is about nowadays. This is a feature that promises to provide new mobility for certain non-driving populations, the elderly, the blind, and safer mobility for the rest of us. Now, I'm going to say some things which may sound like I see this as a problem, but let me start out by saying that everyone, including myself, is excited by these advances and believes that we are entering a period where safety of motor vehicle travel is going to increase greatly. Now, what's going to be my focus, though? I'm not an expert in AI, but despite the rapid advances that we've seen in autonomous vehicle operation, there are still major hurdles to it working. Now, as I said, I'm not an expert in AI. I don't think I know what intelligence is, let alone artificial intelligence. And I'm trained as a psychologist, by the way. So just put that in perspective. Now, there are others here who are going to speak to what they mean by AI. My focus is going to be on a discussion of the human factors that can affect progress in achieving this. What are the human factors? What do we know about people and cars that can inform our development of autonomous vehicles? First of all, I think we need to recognize that despite all the hype, people have many different uses for vehicles, and some are going to be challenging for an autonomous vehicle. I think another one is that we tend to talk about autonomous vehicles as going to make everything a lot safer, but we need to start by recognizing that people aren't such bad drivers and that machine drivers are going to have a tough record to beat. I also want to talk about the fact that many errors that human drivers make and that result in crashes may not be corrected by machine drivers. And I want to talk about distraction. People are inherently distractible and distracted. This has implications. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about the skepticism that people have of the safety of automated vehicles and what might be a way to deal with some of that. So let me start by just saying, how useful is autonomous driving? Well, we've all heard about the uses for special needs groups, the elderly, the blind, or those otherwise disabled from operating a vehicle. We've heard that commuters will be interested in it to help with traffic jams or to relieve them of dealing with traffic jams. Long-distance trip, we might be interested in it because we're driving for 3 hours. It might be nice to turn the driving over to them. And what we're really hearing a lot about, we've all heard about automakers getting into subscription services, and it's the ride service providers that it may be of interest there. But those are kind of special uses. There are a lot of other things we do with vehicles, and I think we need to ask ourselves when will autonomous driving be able to meet those needs? People carpool. They go from house to house. It's not a set route necessarily every day. Driving children to school and after-school activities in the US. I don't think parents are going to put their kids into driverless vehicles right away because they won't even let them go on school buses. They need to drive them to the school themselves and see them go in the door. That's in the US, maybe not so much elsewhere. We tow our boats. We buy vehicles, big SUVs, to tow a boat to the lake and back it into the water. We have poorly mapped roads. We have gravel roads, poorly maintained roads. And then there's just the thing that we do when driving. Sometimes we just want to cruise around and look around. This is no set route. How do you tell the autonomous vehicle what you want to do? So these are, I think, challenges which I'm sure the people who follow me are going to be up to, but this is something to think about in terms of the human context. The next thing I want to talk about is safety. As I said, one of the promises of autonomous vehicles is that they will improve the safety of driving. But what we have to recognize is that autonomous vehicles have a tough record to beat. People are doing an amazing job. What you see here is if we look at insurance crashes in the US and we just assume about 12,000 miles a year in driving, it's actually 120,000 miles between insurance-reported crashes. That's a long ways, okay? If we look at fatality data, we're talking about 85 million miles of travel on US roads between deaths. Even if we look at the more risky teenagers, it's 56 million miles between fatal crash involvements. Waymo, which is said to have the most miles on the road experience, has 8 million miles at the last report, I believe, of automated driving, with humans, though, taking over in difficult situations. We would expect no deaths from that. So it's very hard to know how well this technology is doing by looking at this kind of data, because humans are doing a very good job. The other aspect I want to point out about this is that we're expecting machine drivers to avoid the errors that humans make. In the US, our most recent estimate was that about 94% of crashes involve human error. What are those errors? Some of them are recognition errors, inadequate surveillance, they don't see something coming, they're distracted, or just plain inattention, daydreaming, that sort of thing. 41% are attributed to that. Another type of error, decision errors, though. Account for 33% of so-called driver errors. This is too fast for conditions, too fast for curve, following too closely, false assumption of others' action, things like that. There are performance errors, 11%, overcompensation, poor directional control, panic, freezing. And then there are things that we call non-performance errors. This is like when people fall asleep, they have a medical emergency, some sort of physical impairment. So how would machine drivers avoid these errors? Well, they should do well in avoiding recognition and non-performance errors. The sensor technology and the ability to process a lot of information is what machine drivers excel at. And they won't be distracted, they won't take drugs or alcohol, or fall asleep. At least we hope not. Correcting decision errors is a little less certain. Misjudgments of gap and speed, again, the machine may do a better job of that given the sensors that we have. However, correction of other decisions involves human acquiescence. Too fast for conditions. The vehicle has to slow down, and it has to increase following distance. What if the human doesn't want to do that? They're in a hurry. So they have to allow the vehicle to do it. Still others may challenge machine judgment, mispredicting behavior of others, of other vehicles. Misinterpretation in the presence of environmental challenges, blind turns, glare, weather. So these are challenges. Performance errors also may not be corrected. Are machines going to be less likely to overcompensate or provide better directional control compared to drivers with ESC? Would there be fewer instances where machine drivers freeze because they are uncertain what to do? Or will they freeze because they too are uncertain what to do because they've lost track of the lines or something? And we need to recognize that roadway and environmental factors could increase as critical reasons for crashes with advanced technology, as long as these automated vehicles depend on well-maintained roads, clear markings, and favorable weather. So, in the near term, I would argue it's unrealistic to expect that automated driving will prevent 94% of crashes. It won't happen. But it will have an improvement. The next thing I want to talk about is distraction. There are lessons that we can learn from the distracted driving research. The advent of smartphone technology and in-car electronics, as I say here, caused a lot of concern about increases in distracted driving. And we had evidence. People were crashing while on their phones, and people were dying in those crashes. A big problem. However, when we looked at all the real-world crashes in total, what did we find? Real-world crashes were not increasing as cell phones became more prevalent. Moreover, when we looked at real-world crashes where laws in the US had decreased cell phone use, we didn't see a reduction in crashes, even though cell phone use had gone down. Now, research at IIHS and Virginia Tech in the US showed that when drivers put down their phones, they don't necessarily turn their attention back to driving, okay? Now, the lesson, I think, for where we're going here is that people pay only as much attention to the driving task as they think is necessary, and they are easily distracted. We have to keep that in mind. And this fits in with a study that was reported in Science magazine a few years back, now several years back. In a study called "A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind," the authors report that people are thinking about what is not happening almost as often as they are thinking about what is happening. 50% of the time, you're not thinking about what you're doing. We've all arrived where we're driving to without memory of how we actually got there. Many of you are thinking, when is this guy going to get off the stage? And I can hear from Chris Urmson about AI, which is what I came to hear about. So you're not thinking necessarily about what I'm saying. So distraction is a problem. Now, I almost didn't put this slide in, but I thought it was kind of interesting. To understand how distraction plays out in this development of automated vehicles, we need to think about the SAE levels of driving automation. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen this graphic, but SAE International unveiled this revised graphic with easier to understand language aimed at making the widely referenced standard more consumer friendly. I challenge anyone to find that consumer friendly. Okay? But what I want to just remind us of is that SAE has this definition of levels 0 through 5 of automation. The key thing is that until you get past level 3, so 0, 1, 2, and 3, the driver is the fallback for safe operation of the vehicle. They are really the ones. Whoa. Okay. I need to use this so I don't change so many. So there is a conflict between the engineer's intent and what I think the human response is going to be. The engineers for levels 1, 2, and 3 are relying on humans to be the fallback to keep the vehicle safe. But humans are normally distracted, as we've seen, and they have even less reason to pay attention as functions are automated. And telling them to pay attention is going to be either annoying, in which case they might not buy your vehicle, or ineffective, in which case they may crash it. So I think this is illustrated in Uber's fatal pedestrian crash in Arizona, the driver had been operating in automated mode for hours. The better the vehicle performs in that mode, the less likely the driver will be paying attention, especially after driving for a long time. And interestingly, the crash avoidance features of Uber's system reportedly had been turned off to make operation smoother. If that's true, basically what this automated vehicle was doing was actually a level 3 with the human as the fallback. But the point that I'm trying to make is that drivers are distracted, and as we automate features, they're going to be more easily distracted. They're going to pay attention to other things. In that line, this whole idea that, and I see this term a lot, that drivers should resume control when asked to, this is a term that I think is misappropriated from aviation, where response times can be longer. You don't crash in the next 2 seconds, but you could crash your car in the next 2 seconds. Drivers should not give up control in these systems because they are driver assist systems. I also think we need to realize that if we want people to stay involved with the driving task and not give up control, we've got to make sure that the system is predictable. If the level of automation demands human attention, then it has to behave, let the driver be involved. It can't, for example, punish the driver input. Say, if the driver puts in too much torque in the steering wheel, it says, oh, I'm off then. And for sure, if it turns off, it can't just be a little light on the dash that says, oh, I'm off. You're on your own now. These things need to be straightforward. Activation, deactivation should be positively confirmed by the driver if we really want them to stay involved. People are distractible, and if you want them to be involved, you have to make them involved. Now, the final topic I want to cover is the concern that people have about the safety of automated vehicles. This was a study recently done by advocates for highway and auto safety in the USA, and found that about 70% of drivers shared they were concerned about sharing the road with driverless vehicles. Now, I'm not sure that that's not going to change if driverless vehicles are effective, but it's a concern that we do have to deal with. And more than that, I think we have a hint from early science fiction writers about ways to start dealing with this. I think if you're interested in AI, I'm presuming you also know about Isaac Asimov and the 3 laws of robotics. That first law of robotics, a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. Now, we're not quite at robot level yet, but I think that has implications for us. And that is that people expect automated vehicles to prevent or mitigate crashes at least as well as humans. This leads to me to think that a key thing to make automated driving acceptable to the public is to make crash avoidance paramount in its development. This is kind of the opposite if you think about the Uber pedestrian crash. The automated technology did detect the pedestrian in time to take some action, at least reportedly, but the crash avoidance technology was also turned off, so nothing happened. I think also people will expect, as technology advances, the bar for making sure the machine is safe will be raised. It'll be a tougher standard to meet. As an example here, vehicles with adaptive cruise control, level 1, can still be sold without AEB, that is responsive to stopped vehicles, or cameras that can see traffic lights or other traffic control devices that the driver, through being distracted, being inattentive because the vehicle is driving itself, they don't see. Should it still be the case that you can buy, given the technology level we have now, that you can buy adaptive cruise control without that crash avoidance technology on it? I think Asimov's laws suggest that as the robot becomes more capable, it must use that capability to protect people. So, just to summarize, human headwinds I think there are a number of human headwinds for the development of autonomous vehicles. People use vehicles for many tasks that will be difficult to automate. People are safe drivers, and many and most are asking that machine drivers be at least as safe as they are. Publicity often implies that all crashes caused by human error will be eliminated with automated vehicles, but I think we can see that that's not going to be the case. And I think we need to understand that people's understanding of automated driving will be different than the engineer's intent. My one recommendation, as I said from this, is that we take a lead from science fiction writers who were thinking about machine intelligence earlier. Developers don't have a positronic brain yet, at least I don't think so. Chris, I haven't heard your presentation yet. So it's not clear how you program in these laws. But I think we can do an analog of the first law of robotics. And that analog is to focus this technology that we're developing and make sure that it gets used quickly for preventing crashes. That will get people to understand that this is technology that can help them, not just cool technology that gets from point A to point B without hands. And I thank you, and I hope I stayed close to 20 minutes.
Okay. So optimistically called AI and driving. So thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. I managed to get to Sweden a couple of times a year, and it's always wonderful. So thank you so much. And notably, always to Gothenburg. I've never been anywhere else in Sweden. So for, I don't know why that is. Strange. So I was going to spend a little bit of time to tell you a bit about the opportunity I've had to be engaged with self-driving vehicles over the last 15 years and some of the insights along the way. And like I said, and then talk a little bit about some of the stuff we're doing at Aurora, and then a little bit about some of the challenges. So for me, the journey in self-driving cars started in the Atacama Desert. This was a robot called Hyperion that we were working on with NASA. And it moves at 15 centimeters per second when it was working, which was not much of the time, unfortunately. And we were driving around the desert here, and there was this vulture that lived on that hill back there. And every day it would fly out and then circle overhead for a while and then fly home. And by about day 3, it was clearly very disappointed because it was convinced anything moving that slowly in the desert was going to die, and we had not done it yet. But on that trip, my PhD advisor came down and said, hey, there's this thing called the DARPA Grand Challenge, and we're going to drive from Los Angeles to Las Vegas, and we're going to do that at 50 miles per hour. And I said, that sounds really cool. And so I came back and kind of put my PhD work on hold for a little while, engaged with the DARPA Challenge. And so this was our first vehicle. It was called Sandstorm. It was built out of a Humvee. And this is kind of one of the Lucy for today's self-driving cars, right? One of the missing links. Because much like the self-driving vehicles that had come before it, right? We've been working in this space for 40 years, 50 years, which a lot of people forget. It had cameras, lasers, and radars, but this was the first time where we put that in a vehicle and combined it with maps. And so this was one of the things that actually allowed us to make significant progress back in that challenge of driving across the desert with nobody in control. So we built this vehicle, we took it out to the desert and tested it. For those of you who wonder what it looks like when a self-driving car rolls over, it looks a little bit like this. Car drives to the right, gets caught, and then does that. It was very sad. But we got the thing put back together. We entered it in the Grand Challenge 10 days later. We qualified first. We went out on the race course that was 122 miles long, and we went 7 miles, and we burst into flames, almost literally. And so, that was my first introduction that, moving fast and breaking things was not necessarily the right thing in self-driving technology. So this is where we ended that 7 miles. The vehicle was caught up on a berm in 2004. The media, of course, had a field day. Imagine if the Olympics had a marathon where the best runner went 2 of the 22 miles. It was kind of the equivalent here. But the Defense Department said, that's great. You guys actually got to 40 miles per hour and you drove 7 miles. That's huge. Come back next year. And so we did. And so this was the second vehicle we built. Once again, for those of you not familiar, the black things are supposed to be down. So we tested this very hard in the desert, but this year we were actually pretty regularly driving 150 miles with these vehicles. This accident happened at about 170 miles of a 150-mile test. So don't test beyond what you're supposed to. That year, this was the kind of the finishers of the Grand Challenge. This was, kind of a big day in the field. What was exciting here was this was the first time where things that looked like modern AI techniques were actually applied to the problem. Sebastian Thrun, whose team, the little blue vehicle there from Stanford, ended up winning the competition. It's one of the figures in introducing probabilistic robotics to the field. They were using some of the modern techniques of neural networks to actually estimate the bumpiness of the road and have the things slow down. So now we have maps and we have AI in self-driving vehicles. The Defense Department said, that's wonderful. Why don't you come back and see if you can drive on the road with other traffic? So we did. This was called the Urban Challenge. This is MIT and Cornell having the first self-driving car crash. What was really interesting about this is the problem that really is at the heart of some of the toughest nuts to crack in the self-driving car space, and that is anticipating what the other vehicles on the road are going to do. So I have played this again. Watch what happens. The red vehicle from MIT comes upon this intersection, sees the black vehicle from Cornell parked on the side of the road, and very reasonably says, that vehicle stopped, I'm going to go around. Partway through that, the Cornell vehicle wakes up or whatever and decides, no, actually, I'm going to move now too, and then bumps into one another. And so this problem of anticipating what other drivers are going to do lives with us today, and this was, unfortunately, a very early indication that that was going to be a real thing. And with a little bit of luck, I'll be able to advance this slide. There we go. So this was 2007. This was the vehicle from Carnegie Mellon. I had the distinct privilege of being the technical director for this team. We ended up winning the challenge that year. We were able to get on our soapboxes and talk about how self-driving cars were coming because we were able to drive 60 miles around a test course with other cars and not hit them. So it was a big day. We were all very excited. 5 other vehicles finished that day, which was kind of an indicator that the field had actually made a material advancement. And at that point, the Defense Department in the US said, basically, problem solved. You guys can take it from here. Unfortunately, that was 11 years ago. And a couple of years later, Google, the co-founders of Google, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, decided that they had built this incredible engineering machine. They'd like to start applying that machine to problems that really matter, and one of those was transportation. And so late in 2008, I got an invitation to come to Google to help found the self-driving car company there. And the idea was, let's prove to ourselves that the technology could actually work. And to do that, we set 2 goals when we began. One was to drive 1,000 miles of interesting roads, and the other was to drive 100,000 miles on any roads. And the idea there was to get both a statistically interesting sample of driving, but then also make sure we'd explored the problem sufficiently that we could really say that we could solve it. And within about 1.5 years, we completed those 2 objectives. That's a little too soon. And decided to move forward and kind of commercialize the technology. And through the course of that, I learned a few things. So one, this was the first time a self-driving car got pulled over by the police. This was a reminder and a lesson learned about the importance of engaging with society, right, and the representatives in the community. Turns out the story that came out is the police officer thought that the vehicle was unreasonably holding up traffic. It turns out we had the logs. There was nobody behind it. In practice, he was just really interested. And he wanted to chat with somebody about it, and so he decided to pull him over and have a conversation. So if we had done a better job of engaging with the community, perhaps this, BuzzFeed exclusive or whatever it was would never have happened. The other was kind of one of the last things that the team did while I was still with the company, which was get to the point where we were able to give a blind gentleman a ride through a community without anybody in the vehicle driving him. So this is Steve Mann. He sat in one of their test vehicles, and he went for a several-mile drive through the neighborhood completely by himself. And for me, this was one of the proudest moments because we had kind of turned the corner where we had done enough of the safety work, we had the AI working well enough that we really were comfortable for a small exposure letting him go get a ride. And so that was a couple of years ago. In the intervening time and right around that, the energy in this space has just gone through the roof. Many of you are aware of this, right? It's gone from a couple of $1 million in research budgets to billions and billions of dollars being spent. And that's across both some of the big tech companies, all of the big automotive companies, and then a variety of startups and even some fruit-flavored companies. And that brings us to Aurora, the company that I was fortunate to be a part of founding about 1.5 years ago now. It started with 3 of us. So the gentleman on the far left here, I guess you're right, is Drew Bagnell. He's a professor at Carnegie Mellon University. He was one of the first people applying machine learning to robotics, and he's been doing that for 20 years or so. The 2 of us went to grad school together, so we've known each other for a long time. And then the gentleman on the left here is Sterling Anderson, who was program lead for Model X at Tesla and was the first person to launch Autopilot. And so between the 3 of us, we thought we had a nice foundation of experiences with mine at Google, Drew's at Sterling, and with Drew's at CMU with machine learning, and Sterling's experience actually shipping vehicles with some of the most advanced versions of this technology today. And then around us, we've been able over the last 1.5 years to recruit this incredible group of people that have worked from everything from landing rockets through to automating dump trucks that would maybe fit in this room, to working with a variety of tech companies and whatnot over the years. And we've been working on building the driver. So our company, this is what we do. We're trying to build the safest driver in the world, and that consists for us of building designing or specifying the self-driving hardware, the software, and then the data services that enable that. And this is kind of a glimpse under the hood of kind of how it works. We start out understanding where the vehicle is in the world, how it's posed, and then we layer on top of that a map. So here the yellow lines are representative of the map's representation of lane markers and curbs. And then we bring the sensor data into the vehicle here, the light purple stuff. And then, of course, our perception system kicks in and detects there's a cyclist making hand gestures behind, well, a cyclist behind the vehicle and other vehicles on the road in the blue boxes. And then from there, it's just a matter of figuring out what do you do. Can't be that hard. The software architecture in kind of cartoon form looks like this. So we have some maps. We use that to do what we call localization, figuring out precisely where we are at a 10 centimeter or better resolution. We then, knowing that prior about what's in the world, we look at what's happening around us. We figure out what to do. We go do it. And then in practice, it turns out there's a bunch of other stuff that actually fits into each of these boxes and makes them work. And every time I show this, our CTO, Drew, tells me that's just all wrong, but it's approximately right. So when we talk about maps in automated vehicles, there's actually a variety of different flavors of them. These are the way we think about maps within Aurora. So in the top left, what you're looking at is a vector representation of the world. And so you can see the yellow line showing the lane markers, the red line showing the curbs, and the white dotted lines for center lines. Underlying that is a 3D geometry, so a mesh of what the world looks like, so where the real surfaces are in the world. And then the bottom thing here that looks, I don't know, like I guess a pixelist interpolation of the world, is what we call a localization model. And so this is a 3D representation of the world that allows us to precisely understand where the vehicle is. And this is what that looks like as we fly down a freeway. So there's a bunch of little tiles, little surface tiles, we call them circles, thousands and thousands and thousands of them that represent the local surface everywhere in the world that the vehicle can drive. And then as we're operating, we can use the sensors on the vehicle to track to that and understand our position to better than 10 centimeter resolution and a few millirads of orientation. So we can do full 6 degrees of freedom localization. What that means is in practice, even in Pittsburgh, the vehicles can drive literally on top of their own tracks. And when we go through tunnels, which we don't have so many of in California, but we have an awful lot of on the East Coast, like this, where GPS is completely useless, the car knows where it is very precisely to, again, a few centimeters resolution. And that's the base, the underpinning technology that allows us, our vehicles, to drive down the road. Now we need to see what's going on in the world. At Aurora, we believe pretty deeply that you can't use any one sensor. All sensors suck. It turns out that's unfortunately the secret. So for example, if you look at cameras, there's a cyclist over here on the right, but because of the exposure, it's very difficult to pick that person out. When we look at radar, so this is radar going through one of the tunnels in Pittsburgh. All of this purple snow here is a variety of multipath effects coming from the radar energy bouncing off of the walls. And so it turns out there isn't a bunch of snow in front of the car, there isn't a bunch of stuff there. So we have to figure out, how do we tell the stuff that's really the walls from the stuff that is in the middle of the road? And here, this is LiDAR on a vehicle operating autonomously in a snowstorm. And the LiDAR is sensitive enough, which is not really a great thing, to pick up all these purple dots, which are actually the snow falling around the vehicle and getting energy back from that. So again, we have to be able to filter that noise away from what's really out in the world there. And how do we do that? Well, we do a combination of machine learned techniques and kind of good old-fashioned engineering. So the bottom half of the screen, what you're looking at is the raw activations from our detector that's operating on the data coming in. And then above that, we're taking the data and we're filtering it through common processes to get something that actually looks reasonable and smooth. And you can't really get away with it without doing the machine learning, because that is the state of the art. That's the best stuff to extract the symbol from the signal. But if you just use detection alone, if you just use raw ML, things are not going to go well for us. Similarly, if we're driving down a crowded street, our detections overestimate the position and size of vehicles. So then we apply something, fit the boxes to the vehicle so we can precisely estimate their location. And what you're looking at here in the video is the output on the right side here, which is what the machine learning system is telling us. There's a car roughly here. And on the left, we've done some careful engineering work to refine the geometry of those vehicles to precisely estimate their position so we can drive safely. And this is what it turns out that looks like when you start to get into interesting situations. So on the left here, we're making a left turn at a very busy intersection. We're tracking the dozens and dozens of vehicles around us. On the right here, our techniques are sensitive enough to pick out this person on a motorbike that's going to lane spit very closely between other vehicles on the road. Because of the way we've structured the problem, we're actually able to pull that signal of the motorcyclists out from the nearby vehicles, which turns out to be a comparatively hard problem. And then we can do fun things, like we can take video from a drone and superimpose it on our bicycle tracking system. And here you can see doing a halfway decent job of keeping an eye on the people milling around in our parking lot. Our poor unsuspecting self-driving car got attacked by these people. So that's a glimpse into the perception system and how we blend machine learning and more classical algorithmic approaches to solving the problem. One of the hairier questions is, how do you apply machine learning in the context of motion planning? It turns out that if you do motion planning naively, what happens is you write a really nice deterministic algorithm, and then you spend the next all of time tuning knobs and parameters to make it behave the way you'd like to. And then once you've spent all of time tuning those knobs, the perception guys go and change something, and then you have to go back and spend all of time tuning those knobs again. So at Aurora, we're taking the approach of, how do we build the motion planning system in a way that we can feed continually updated perception systems into it and then relearn the behavior of the vehicle. And the way we do that, of course, is a thoughtful application of machine learning. So on the bottom right here, a vehicle driving down an urban road comes to a stop sign, waits for a moment, realizes its turn, sees a pedestrian crossing on the left, yields to the oncoming vehicle, and then makes the left turn. And it turns out if you hand code this algorithm, it would probably do roughly that. But it would, again, take a long time to tune. What we've done here is basically shown the vehicle examples of thousands of people making transitions across intersections, and then using that as the model for how to behave. And then here's a more complicated set of scenarios. So here we're making basically a U-turn on a freeway. So we're exiting in suburban Pittsburgh, following the vehicle to a stop sign. Vehicle recognizes it needs to stop in the future here. Does it very cautiously. And now there's a lot of traffic. As you can see, the blue boxes are other vehicles on the road. There's a lot of traffic at this intersection. And now the vehicle has generalized what it saw at other intersections and realized when it was its turn to take a left turn here, and then progresses through the intersection. You're seeing the freeway overhead here, and then it makes a left turn again because it understands in this case it has right of way, and then off it goes. This is one of the kind of the stickiest problems we face, and this has to do, again, to that kind of human acceptance problem. So here our vehicle is merging onto a freeway, and there's a big truck, which is the yellow thing over here, the two blue boxes up above here, and then there's a little minivan, I think it is, coming into the scene behind it. And our vehicle is accelerating from a stop onto a freeway on-ramp. And so now it has to figure out, should it go in front of the big truck, should it go between the big truck and the minivan, or should it go behind the minivan? And it turns out if you can code something up, but almost certainly it will feel wrong because people have a very, very subtle sense for what's the appropriate gap to pull into. And so here, we're pausing at that moment again. The vehicle has been accelerating. At this point, it decides the right thing to do is actually back off, slow down a little bit, and slot in behind the second vehicle. And that's how it'll operate safely and smoothly on the road. And that after showing the vehicle many examples of people merging safely and appropriately, we've been able to teach the system the right way to do that. So that's a little bit of an insight into the way we approach the technology and how we apply, again, a combination of modern AI, machine learning, deep learning techniques, and kind of rigorous classic engineering. I'm going to talk a little bit about some challenges. So in California, we are blessed to be able to report every incident that happens with one of our self-driving vehicles to the public. So here, this is what those look like. In practice, this is what that is in reality. So two cars stop in front of us smoothly, our vehicle stops, and then the fourth vehicle does not. Often it's kind of assumed that the self-driving vehicles do something weird. What often happens is they behave perfectly normal, and inattentive drivers bump into them. And the vast majority of the accidents that happened, if not all, I think all but one, while I was at Google, were this kind of thing. This is the but one. This is the problem where a self-driving car basically turned into and very slowly joined a city bus as it was driving down the road. And this is a classic example of the challenges of interpreting the world around the vehicle and making assumptions about what other drivers do. In this scenario, the vehicle was pulled to the right to make a right turn. There was an obstruction in the road. It needed to nudge to the left to go around it, and then bumped into the bus. The bus driver saw the space and said there was plenty of room for it to make it. The vehicle saw the gap between it and traffic and said there was no chance that the self-driving car or the bus would make that gap, and so it shouldn't. It should just go because the bus is going to be stuck behind it. Turns out they were both right in that the bus driver could have made it if the self-driving car didn't move, and after the self-driving car moved, there was not space for the bus driver to bump into it. But this interpretation of the road around you and other people's intent is tricky. This is a similar situation that happened earlier with Uber in Arizona. In this case, 2 lanes of traffic were stopped. 1 lane was free-flowing. The Uber vehicle was traveling at the speed limit. It passed an intersection, and at that intersection, a human driver was nudging out. They saw stop traffic. They assumed that anyone moving in the center lane would then move cautiously because of that, and so they would have time to pull out. Turns out the Uber driver was behaving technically according to the law, but because the human norm of driving more slowly when there's dense traffic that's stopped adjacent to you wasn't being observed, they ended up in this unfortunate situation. And there's been much more tragic outcomes. This was a Tesla accident that happened in Florida, and this was a similar kind of challenge, but in this case, it was the man-machine within the vehicle challenge, where the Tesla driver didn't understand the true limitations of the technology failed, and the driver wasn't paying attention. And Adrian talked a lot about this kind of from a statistical perspective. So very quickly about the future here. The future is going to be divided between driving and riding. I personally think the biggest impact we can have is moving the riding opportunity forward because I think that a lot of the human factor problems will slow the ultimate benefits of the driving assistance kind of approaches. Why is there so much excitement in the space? Well, in the US, the average cost per mile of getting a trip from A to B, it costs about $1 to pay for the driver and about 60 cents to maintain the vehicle. So it's $1.60 per mile. If we could take that driver and drop the cost from $1 per mile to something like 10 cents per mile, there'd be an incredible adoption of the technology because it would now be comparable to owning vehicles. And the opportunity, if the revenue were 10 cents per mile, over the 3 trillion miles driven in the US is something like $300 billion per year. From another perspective, if you're an OEM, this was examples for VW, their average, just by reverse engineering their SEC filings, they make about $5,000 per vehicle. In contrast, if they could provide the driving capability and substitute the $70,000 per year for the drivers with $10,000 worth of equipment in the vehicle, over 5 years, that's $340,000 that they have the opportunity to make. So that's kind of 2 orders of magnitude more revenue that they could possibly generate per vehicle. And so that's interesting. For Aurora, we care about the business side of it, but we're actually much more excited about the opportunity to kind of have a positive impact in the world. So in the US, about 40,000 people killed every year. The direct and indirect cost of that to the US economy is about $1 trillion, and congestion costs about $150 billion per year. So the impact to serve the nation is pretty profound. 40,000 people killed per year is unacceptable status quo. It's broader than that, so the opportunity to provide mobility to people who don't otherwise have it, to give people back their time when they're commuting every day, and to improve cities are all very exciting opportunities for us. For me, I've had a few personal connections in this space. So this is Steve Mann, the gentleman who got the ride in the self-driving car earlier. He's an incredibly gifted individual, but he's forced to commute for 2 hours a day using transit instead of the 30 minutes it would otherwise cost. This is the brother of the best man at my wedding. His name's Stephen Fletcher. He lives in Canada. He was driving to a mine site and hit a moose when he was in his early 20s. He became instantly paralyzed and became a quadriplegic. He's had an incredible career in politics since then. But if we could have avoided that moment for him, it would have been profound. And if today we could give him the mobility we all take for granted, that would be profound as well. And then finally, this is my family, my 2 boys. My older son is just turned 15 last week. That means he gets his driver's license in 6 months, which is truly terrifying. When you look at the statistics for traffic accidents, we have an opportunity to not have him become a statistic, right? We have an opportunity for all of your family and everyone else's to avoid those statistics. And for us at Aurora, that's kind of what gets us up in the morning every day. It's the opportunity to go out there, work on something incredibly compelling and exciting technologically, but that will have a profound impact on society. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it. I hope I didn't run too long. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here after sharing the stage with Adrian and Chris. That's some kind of pressure, I would say. So sorry for that, Maria. So if I'm not top-notch today, then that only reason is because the lack of self-driving capabilities. Because yesterday evening I attended a dinner in Stockholm, and then I had to drive by car here together with a friend. So I hit the bed at 3 a.m. this morning. Would have been much nicer ride in a self-driving car, I must say. So I thought, talking about autonomous driving then, and self-driving cars, what topic should I choose? I mean, we are a Zenuity, we are existing here, we are in many different places in the world. But talking after Adrian and Chris, then I thought the only thing I can talk about is not going into depth in AI, because of lack of capability. So instead I go into how can we make it real? So how do we make it real? How can we secure that we get this out on the road and save all the traffic and accidents that we could have? So then I will talk about that. Short, 10, 15 minutes max, and then we're done, and then we will see the guys up on the stage again. So if you take the next one, please. I do it here. Oh, okay, no problem. All these lack of self, Okay, cool. So I thought, self-driving cars. We are on the driving side of things. That's a start for Zenuity. We focus on private vehicles with the driver. We do not take on the entire world at once. We take it in pieces where we solve it one case by case. And we do it where it makes most value for these customers that we're after. So we start by solving the traffic jam. People tend not to like the traffic jam. Then we take on the commute. That's also not so fun. And then we take on Then we take on the parking. So those three things we start by solving, and we do it unsupervised. So that's our take to market. That's also a bit where our heritage comes from, being born out of Veoneer and Volvo cars. So that makes most sense for us. I would also say that we focus also on industrialization and make it real and functional safety. We believe we have a place to be when it comes to functional safety, because we see a lot of other actions in the area where you can build great demo capabilities, but really bringing that with a functional safe argumentation all the way out to the road. That's where the real challenge is, and that's where we are taking that on. Let's see if this works. Yeah, perfect. So how do we do that then? Then we think cooperation with partners is really important. And of course, that's a benefit to say that in front of 400 persons, because then we have more opportunities to collaborate. So competition with partners, and it's also collaborating and competing at the same time. If you learn something in a relation, it's worthwhile to withhold, to continue in that one. That's what we are doing. The other one, that is support the local and international ecosystem. I think this conference here is a great opportunity to do that. And it's really important for us. So when we got started, we started to think about what can we do with all these startups. We are lacking the startups in the area. How can we get them tighter to us? So then we managed to get Katarina here on board and creating the Mobility X Lab together with Volvo Trucks, or AB Volvo that is, Volvo Cars, Veoneer, Urmson, CVT, and ourselves. That's a good starting case. So now we got that up and running. And now it all comes into the AI area, of course, and how can we be strong in that? And AI is all about data and, of course, intelligent persons. So then now we are creating this one in the region, and that's fantastic. So let's continue on that. But it doesn't become fantastic until we connect with people like Chris and Adrian here and connect them to our ecosystem and make something beneficial out of it for both parties. So that's important. Then, of course, bringing this to life, we are focusing solely on teams. Teams can bring this to life, so that's what we are focusing on. We call it purpose-driven teams, and I'll briefly come back to that. And then, as a company, then we understand that it is an extremely complex problem, and how to tackle that. And one way of not tackling it, that is to build a fixed structure and never change for the years to come. So the way we are operating is focusing on teams and shifting capabilities and resources depending upon the needs, the technology challenges, and what makes most business sense. So we can change the entire company every 6 weeks if we would like. That's not very efficient, but we can. Yeah, so this is right now part of our network that we are creating, and of course we would like to build more relations, so that's important to get this going. This is our org chart. I've shown this, I will always show it in all presentations. This is how we view our organization. And it's focused on teams. It's not upon structure, it's not upon who reports to whom. It's about the teams and how we enable the teams. So if you click on them, you find a purpose. Should be rather simple. You find who is the coach. That is the person responsible for the team, that they have the prerequisites and the competence and the skills. This one gone? Now it's back. And then you have a product owner. And a product owner is the one guiding all the technology decisions. So the flow is from the customer to the product owners to the teams in a very simplified version. But it shouldn't be any management team interfering in between. Then we have reached the utopia. That's what we are striving for. So how are we doing then? Well, we're doing something like this. We have no budget. And now Veoneer starts to be a bit worried. but we have a very stringent forecasting process. We are not spending time on trying to defend who's got a certain budget. We're totally focusing on the future. What do we need when? And then, of course, our finance guy is coming and securing that it matches the kind of frames we have, so it's not out of control. We're really precise when it comes to this, but we are not protecting budgets, because that's really bad for flexibility. Non-hierarchical, I think I mentioned that. We are jump-starting all the teams with the 4P process. It sounds tough, but it's really so. When you get the teams together, the first thing they need to agree upon is why do they exist as a team, not as individuals, but as a team. So what's the purpose with the team? What are they trying to achieve? How are they going to achieve it? What kind of methods are they would like to use? Scrum or Kanban or something else that they have? It's totally up to the teams, because they have the knowledge how to execute fast and what makes sense. Yeah, continued prioritizations, and of course, and group managers that are not involved in the technology decisions, but that's being done by the product owners. So that's how we operate. Simple like that. And then we run in 6 weeks product increments. That's a minimum, what we're running right now. So solving a really complex problem, you need to have a simple and flexible organization. And we are not, of course, in the perfect world. We are striving for that. So if you have any ideas, please challenge us and we will take it up for sure. So this is my last slide. So if I just summarizing, I think that the value is not going from a tier 2, tier 1 to OEM. That is kind of gone. Now we need to mix in startups, you need to find new structures, you need to find new alliances and way of working. So it's a different world. And the next one, then competition, I think I mentioned that. And I think if you look at our partners that we're working with, some of them are competing and having competing offers in certain areas, and that's fine. As long as we find a mutual arena where we can learn from each other, it's great. And be faster, of course. Because ultimately, it's about speed and innovation. And our approach to that one is through autonomous teams. So autonomous driving, autonomous teams, almost too simple. So thank you for that.